listening to Wake Up, powered by KEXP.org on Radio New York.
It's Moby from his new one, Last Night, a song called I Love to Move In Here. Moby's got a show coming up on June 25th at the Mercury Lounge with his punk side project, Little Death. Heard from Damian Marley earlier in the show, so I thought I'd play a track from his dad, from Catch a Fire, the first album featuring the Wailers. Bob Marley and the Wailers was Stir It Up. This was their first major success outside of Jamaica. And the Roots starting things off, I Will Not Apologize. You can find that on their brand new one, Rising Down. I'm Kevin Cole. This is Wake Up on Radio New York. Appreciate you listening. Coming up, I've got new music from Wolf Parade and soul legend Al Green.
Hello, I'm Josh Goodine, host of Afropop Worldwide on Radio New York. Join me every Saturday night at 11 for music and stories from cultural hotspots of Africa, Caribbean, Latin America, and of course, New York. That's Afropop Worldwide. Saturday nights at 11 on Radio New York 91.5 FM.
Listen, all you New Yorkers.
The Ghost Dancers is a performance running now through Friday night at the Sanford Meisner Theater for the Lakota Sioux. To the battleground between history and hope. The Ghost Dancers guide the journey.
Un, deux, test.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is this for real? Is the session title. And yes, it is for real. And I would like to welcome you to this session that is all about connection, the interconnection of real life and virtual life worlds. We have a change in the order of the presentation. We'll start with the last presentation up front because we actually still wait for a guy, Jim Doris, that would like to talk over video conference, but we haven't got a hold of him yet. So we'll start up front with the talk of Jonathan Taylor from Cisco and David Wordley, the director of the Series Games Institute at the University of Coventry. And it will be a talk about a real-life example of the interconnection of the two worlds. So, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. What a fantastic place to be in the sun, I have to say. The session that I want to go through over the next half an hour, rather than me share with you a corporate view of the world, what I wanted to do was actually start to bring some show and tell. What does this stuff actually mean in reality, albeit virtual reality? And David Wordley from the University of Coventry has kindly offered to give us a bit of an insight with regards to the work that they're doing within the Research Institute. But before we move into that section, what I'd like to do is just give you some background, some insight into areas that are of interest to Cisco and obviously, therefore, in the virtual worlds. So, just a quick recap. I'm probably sure most people in this room are au fait with the terminology on the screen that you can see here. But let's just recap. Web 1.0. That's when we start to actually put information, logic, presentation and data and bind it and present it one way. Very similar to a textbook. Very similar to a video or a DVD. However, we now have the Web 2.0 view of the world. And where this differs and where it's slightly unique is the ability to actually hook in to the Web 1.0 view of the world using bespoke application logic. So actually, Web 2.0 is about application collaboration. And then we've got things starting to fizzle in the Web 3.0 view of the world. And the true difference between Web 3 and Web 2 and 1 is we have true and full dissemination of presentation, logic and data. But interestingly enough, we have to bind this together to make sense of it. So in other words, what I would argue is that Web 1 is actually about communication. Web 2 is about collaboration, and Web 3 is about true personalisation. And when I refer to personalisation, I'm actually talking about true personalisation. What's the legal, the social implications of that information, for example? So if we look at this on a timeline, as you can see here on the left-hand side, we've got the formal creation of the web. And we've got an aspirational endpoint of artificial intelligence, which does concern some people. Now, on the top, you'll see a view of the world referred to by Sir Tim Berners-Lee around the web construct and the semantic web. And underneath, we have terminology, the web terminology. Now, the technology that underpins both of these views of the world is identical. The difference is how that's bound together. So in a semantic web, taxonomies, ontologies, linkages, dictionary lookup, very logical linkages bind this information together. In the web terminology and Web 3 per se, we're actually looking at true elements of personalisation. So my final slide is here on the left. But it's a very important slide with an enormous amount on this. And if there's one thing that I'd ask you all to take away from my small 5 to 10 minutes worth, it's this one slide. On the bottom left-hand, on the bottom axis, you'll see supply and demand. That refers to business models. I create something in the marketplace as a product. I hopefully supply the marketplace with the product. At some point, if I remove that product from the marketplace, I expect the market to demand it. Two different business models. Examples could include open source software. We were comfortable in the supply mentality where we create a product, albeit software, albeit hardware. We take that to the marketplace. And then you have the opportunity these days to be part of a community and choose to purchase that software. Different business models. On the left-hand side, you'll see a usability axis. Now, obviously, invention and innovation per se in any area, but technology is no exception, we start on a usability scale of 0. And over a substantial amount of time, hopefully we start to improve on the usability scale. On the bottom left-hand side, you'll see a reference to institutional-based technology. This is where you buy the technology, you put it into a room, you heat it, you power it, you light it. This is what we're all comfortable with. The top right-hand corner is when we start looking at the concepts of leveraging services, software as a service type models. Now, this is not a linear step or series. We're not saying you transition from Web 1 to get to Web 2 and then obviously to Web 3 at some point in time. You operate as and when you need to in these various different spaces. But the interesting thing at the moment is absolutely the use and how we can utilise software as a service models and how we can do it to affect true personalisation. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to David. I'll let David introduce himself. But needless to say, the work that they're doing at the university around virtual worlds, immersive technologies and buildings hopefully will be insightful to you all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jonathan, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm David Wortley. I'm Director of the Serious Games Institute, which is part of Coventry University Enterprises. It's a commercial organisation working with the university to advance two particular areas, serious games and virtual worlds. There are really three messages that I really want to bring out in my slides this afternoon, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. And that's to look at the way in which converging technologies are changing learning and the learning processes, although the work that we do covers much more than learning. Looking at how games-based learning and immersive environments can create new opportunities for lifelong collaborative learning. And then finally, a brief glimpse of the work we're doing with smart campuses and smart buildings and how we're trying to integrate physical and virtual worlds together. So a very quick introduction to our institute. This is what it looks like. You see my avatar, Hobson Hoggard, hovering over the mirror virtual world of our institute. So if you have an account in Second Life, you're more than welcome to visit our building and get a glimpse of what it looks like inside and the kind of facilities that we have there. But our mission is to become an international centre of excellence for virtual worlds and serious games for serious social and economic issues, including learning. I can't give you a quick demonstration tour because the video hasn't been uploaded. But our business is about engaging immersive environments which deliver compelling real-world benefits. And we have two main focal points, virtual worlds and serious games. So starting by looking at converging technologies and their impact on learning. Converging technologies are having a major impact on the way we live, work and play because information and knowledge is available to everyone from the earliest age in a very rich format. And it's also important to stress that the boundaries between what is real and what is virtual are blurring. So if you look at the impact on trying to develop applications for the future, trying to develop business strategies, learning strategies, maybe it's not quite so easy. And to illustrate the point, there's a picture here of a school photograph with a young boy on the second row. That's 1961. Any idea what's in the question mark, where that is? Well, in the interest of time, I'll move on. It's me. And the point about this is not to say, don't I still look the same as I did in 1961? That's not the point. The point is that in 1961, you could probably fairly safely predict that I would be older, fatter, with less hair and a lot slower. Back in 1961, you could make a reasonable guess at how things would be in 2008. But that's not true of everything. And if you look at what the computer looked like in the year of my birth, 1949, and try to predict what it would look like in 2007, who would ever have imagined that in 2008 we would have the iPhone with all of its functionality? Similarly, if you look at some of the input devices that are around today, just going back a short distance to 2000, looking at the mouse we're all familiar with, and some of the devices that are appearing on the market today, does anybody know what the device is on that guy's head? I'll tell you now, it's not a Bluetooth headset that he's not put in the right place. Any idea what it is? It's a device called NeuroSky. And the guy is controlling an avatar in a virtual world by his brainwaves, by the power of thought. It's a neural feedback system. When it was first launched in 2007, there was somebody dressed in a Darth Vader outfit with a light sword, and all he could do was switch the sword on and off by thinking. Now, we've got people who are navigating avatars through virtual worlds by the power of thought. We've got the Nintendo Wii as another ambient input device. This is a device that I also saw in San Francisco earlier this year, where there is no interface at all. This guy is playing a boxing game simply by standing in front of the screen and doing that. And it's controlled by a 3D camera that has spatial awareness. New device for replacing the mouse with 3D functionality. This is my favourite, Guitar Hero. And the point about this is that we're starting to see the emergence of a lot of devices and software applications that allow us to interact with technology in a very different and much easier way, making it accessible to a wider population. So when we come to predicting the future, I think it's fairly safe to say that Moore's law will continue to apply. But the only thing that's predictable about the way we use technology is that it will become increasingly unpredictable. And why is that? It's because of Web 2.0, because for almost the first time in human history, we've moved from a society which used to be based on consumption of information into a society which is based on media production. And every man and his dog who's got access to technology now has the ability to be able to publish information. And it's this sharing and knowledge and perceptions of information that's making things very unpredictable about the way we use technology. And in itself, this creates some challenges for society. One of them is the attention economy. With all the media channels available today, whether you're involved in learning or the commercial sector, it's very hard to engage audiences. And another factor in the education sector, which I think we're really not coming to terms with, is the so-called digital native or Generation Y learner. And you see this young man sat in front of the television, he's playing a game on his laptop, he's in a chat room, and he's listening to his iPod all at the same time. And we have a generation of young people who are coming through our system now who are multitasking and view education in a totally different way to previous generations. And I don't know if you can read this slide, but this is a slide which indicates how those attitudes towards learning and capabilities to learn have changed literally within my generation. So that's the first message, is that these technologies are changing both the learning process and also learners themselves. So what role does games-based learning and immersive environments play? I use this phrase to indicate the point I'm trying to make. Dwyad Gwyag stands for do what you always do, get what you always get. Dwyad Yids is do what you always do, you're in deep sludge or snow or whatever other noun you prefer to use. The point is that when throughout most of my life in business, I was content to know that if I kept doing the right things in my business, I would always get the right results. Today, that's not true. And in fact, if you keep doing what you've always done, you're likely to land yourself in trouble. So when it comes to learning and education, games-based learning is not new. This is a Bruegel painting, and if you look at it, you see all sorts of human activities going on there based around games and play. And everyone in that picture is learning about themselves, their capabilities, and the world around them. So it's not new. Games-based learning is not new, nor is classroom-based learning, which has always been delivered in a hierarchical way by knowledge professionals. I'm going to flip through these slides just to make the point that what we're seeing now in education, I believe, is a shift from the old models of learning and education, which were based on knowledge transfer from knowledge professionals, based on assimilation of existing knowledge, and in a classroom-style environment, to a situation now which is much more based on peer-to-peer learning, new knowledge, discovery, and learning which is anytime, anywhere, and lifelong. And this generation of new generation Y of learners are demanding this type of learning. They won't be satisfied with anything else. So I'm now going to move on to the Smart Campus session and just try and illustrate what we're trying to do with our philosophy. So we have our physical building and we have our virtual building. And we're working on a number of projects which are designed to integrate real and virtual worlds. So working with a variety of different partners, one of these partners is from the construction industry, a company called Implenia. They provide us with this doll's house. And this doll's house is controlled by a small building management system in the black box. And it's linked to a model of that house in the virtual world. And the use of 3D visualization and mirror virtual worlds enables this construction company to be able to deliver energy savings typically between 25 and 30%. And that's quite staggering savings. So we've partnered with them to explore how we can use these same sensor technologies to integrate real and virtual worlds to deliver more than just cost savings on buildings. And what we're looking at is exploring the potential of smart buildings for mobile learning and rich visitor experience. And the analogy that I would use is that when you go into your favourite hotel or if you go into your golf club, one of the reasons why you like a particular club or a particular hotel is they treat you in a personalised way. You go to a golf club not just to play golf, but you go to a golf club for social networking, to make contacts with people. And the good golf clubs actually facilitate those kinds of networking arrangements. They bring you together with people that you are interested in. Now, our concept of a smart building is to use these technologies to be able to create intelligence buildings which build up a personal relationship with visitors and with tenants, and almost like a building Facebook. And they proactively help you to develop relationships with people who come into the building, not just in the physical environment, but in the virtual environment as well. So this is our view of smart buildings and smart campuses. They are places where technology is embedded to make them more than just a physical space. They're proactive in supporting lifelong learning, anytime, anywhere, context-based learning, and acting as social networking hubs, because this is what the next generation of learners have come to expect. So looking at the kind of places where you might be learning in future, this is an actual screenshot from our launch event last September. As our Vice-Chancellor speaking about problem-based learning, not only to the physical conference in Coventry, but also to the avatars in our virtual auditorium. And I think she's probably the first Chancellor that's used her own avatar to launch a virtual island in Second Life. These are some of the other places that we've been involved in, both events which are hybrid events, which take place in a physical space and simultaneously in a virtual space. Most of our workshops that we run every month do this, so we talk to an audience like yourselves, but at the same time we have people in a virtual auditorium who are interacting with us. And that's an example of one of the virtual auditoriums that we've used. And this particular event was a solely virtual event where I was involved in an expert panel with the Chief Executive of the Electric Sheep Company in New York and the Chief Technology Officer in BP. The guy was sat in New York in his office. I was sat in my armchair, which looked bizarrely like the one my avatar is sat in there. Sat at home watching television, taking part in a one-hour chat show. This is another example of a hybrid event recently in Kuala Lumpur at the Global Knowledge Summit. This was an event where all of the expert panel in the physical conference were logged on to Second Life, and so they had a virtual panel. So I was sat in the front row of the audience, and I thought I'd log on to Second Life as well and join them both physically and virtually. And the picture you see there is a bit bizarre because there is my avatar with the balding head looking at the virtual panelists. And on the screen is the real me looking at my laptop, looking at my avatar, looking at the virtual panelists. This is another example of purely virtual. This is a streaming media chat show run by Metanomics. So there's a professor in a university in Virginia interviewing me into a virtual audience. So when we go back to what Jonathan was saying at the beginning, the mobile devices that we have in our pocket are becoming our alter ego. They contain our lives. They contain our identity. So if you look at what people are willing to reveal within Facebook, some of the concerns and issues that people have about privacy and protection of information, if people are willing to share the kind of personal information in Facebook, then smart buildings and smart campuses have a role in brokering and acting as a social networking hub. So this is our vision of the smart campus. It will not only support estates management and wireless access, but they will build personal relationships with students which facilitate social network and peer-to-peer learning. So that's the final message that I want to leave you with. And now I'll invite any questions to either myself or Jonathan.
Thank you very much for that interesting presentation. Let's give the speaker a hand, please. Are there any questions? Well, if not, then I have one.
Okay.
You were talking about the interconnection of real life and virtual worlds. What would you say, in your experience, are the three common key factors to make this interconnection a success?
That's a good question. You should have briefed me beforehand. I could have thought about it. Well, three things off the top of my head. The first of these, which is a challenge that we're wrestling with Cisco at the moment, is the technological aspect of it, of accurate location tracking. Now, we're all familiar with sat-nav, and in fact, we had to rent a sat-nav at Brussels Airport this morning to find our way here. So when you're in the outside world, tracking your movements are reasonably easy. When you get inside a building, it's a different story. So Wi-Fi technology, being able to track people with mobile devices is the first challenge. The second challenge is more of probably an emotional challenge, because when you talk to people about Second Life and other virtual worlds, particularly if they've never been involved in them, people's immediate reaction to me is, Second Life, I haven't got even time even for a first life, so they think it's something that's not for them. But what you forget, what a lot of people forget, is that we've been using virtual worlds for many, many years. When you have a telephone conversation, you're in a virtual world. You're in two different physical locations, but you're connected in a virtual world, although it's just an audio world. So the second thing I would say is to do with if you like, the emotional aspect of it. And probably the third thing, which I alluded to finally at the end, is this whole notion about concerns about privacy and protection of information. People don't like the idea of being tracked, or their movements being tracked. But I think over a period of time, if you deliver value to people so they've got something back for being tracked, you will have a situation where when people want to be tracked, they'll press a button, and that will give them access to a range of services. If they want to be private and cloak themselves, like the Starship Enterprise, they'll press the button again and they'll become invisible or anonymous to the world around them.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
Just a small question. What do you think the future really is? Is this a one huge virtual world or many small virtual worlds interconnected? Or is this the same thing anyway?
Well, yes, that's a very good question. Currently, there are about 80 different virtual worlds of any size, and there are about another 100 planned over the next year. And I think certainly in the immediate future, you're going to see many more different virtual worlds for different applications. But then over a period of time, what you'll see is a rationalization where certain standards will be adopted with virtual worlds that will allow you to transfer from one virtual world to another. And people like Real Extend and OpenSim are already doing a lot of good work in this area. And then within the sort of medium term, you'll also see a lot of virtual worlds fail because their commercial model isn't sustainable. I would like just to give one example which surprised me because I didn't know anything about it until I was in New York earlier this year. Is one of the most successful virtual worlds at the moment is Barbie World. Barbie World targeted at young girls. They are signing up 45,000 new members a day, and they already have about 10 million. And they're not just targeting young girls, they're targeting their mothers, and they have if you like, a social responsibility model, which is about how you use virtual worlds to strengthen the relationship between mother and daughter. That's quite an interesting model. So to go back to your question, I think you're going to see a lot of different virtual worlds, but they will be more interconnected than they are now.
Wonderful. David, Jonathan, thanks a lot for that interesting presentation. Let's thank the speaker again. Thank you. Which brings us then to the second presentation. And just a small question to the back. I'm seeing here, do we have Connect to the US? We don't. Okay. Then that means our next presenter will be Robert Simbalist from Janet, UK. Robert is the UK School Strategy Group Manager, and he will give us a status update concerning the video conferencing service of Janet, the collaboration service, and the interconnection of it. The floor is yours.
Hi, thanks a lot. Well, I'm not really going to go into the virtual here. I'm going to talk about real video conferencing between real people, although I see the connection, and quite a few of the things that were mentioned in that last talk were actually quite pertinent to video conferencing over distances. So I'm going to talk about international collaboration eventually. I know this was billed as international collaboration, but I'm going to get there. I'm going to talk about enabling teaching and learning and collaboration, and video conferencing in particular. Something about the content that schools in the UK are now accessing, and a collaboration service that we've started up to enable that to happen more easily and for schools to find partners. Some of the challenges I'm going to cover, and also I'll get to the international collaboration. So, Janet, as you probably know, covers the whole of the UK. This shows the backbone network, and we currently have about 18 million users. That's everybody in education, including the whole of the school sector. And communicating with other countries between schools sectors can be quite challenging, and this is one of the things I want to touch on later. The schools network in the UK has 4 main regions, and these are split up into actually 13 sub-regions. There's Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and of course the 10 regions in England, totaling about 30,000 schools. There's a lot of collaboration going on between the schools sector and universities and colleges now, and the South East Grid for Learning is running a careers video conferencing link-up between universities and schools. And the National Archives is also being supported by the South East Grid for Learning, and of course that supplies information to the whole of the education sector. The Welsh Video Network in Wales has got a higher education link project, and Cumbria and Lancashire Education Online, supported by Lancaster University, has a network of regional museums delivering amazing video conferencing content. One in particular, one that's notable, is a lady in an air raid shelter who gets her handbag out and says to the kids, "What do you think I've got in here?" You know, and she pulls out a ration card and a letter from her sister and all sorts of interesting things. And it really is incredibly educational and very, very entertaining. Some of the sponsored connections that our primary connected institutions deliver include connections to museums, hosting national video conferencing events, the National Space Centre, and of course other national museums like the National Maritime Museum. Video conferencing really took off a couple of years ago when the DFES very kindly, and I think Steve Hogger, who may be in the audience here, was the person responsible for funding that, so we're very grateful to him. He funded a pilot project in England, followed by a project throughout the UK, to enable schools throughout the UK to use the Janet video conferencing service, which was already available to universities and colleges. And some of you may have already heard me talk about our plans a couple of years ago at Torina, and what we were going to do for schools. And we had 2 very successful projects which have turned into a national service, and the Janet Video Conferencing Service and its sister service, the Video Technology Advisory Service, support local authorities, regional broadband consortia, the 3 devolved administrations, and all of the schools directly. But during this project, we realized there was a need to get video conferencing partners together. It's all very well having a list, a directory of endpoints, but you need to know who's at the endpoint, not about the equipment. It's much more important to set up conferences between people than it is between endpoints. So a bit about the JVCS, Janet Video Conferencing Service. There's a management centre of around half a dozen operators. These people are full-time on this, and I think they work every day of the year except Christmas Day and New Year's Day, something like this. So it's a real 24/7 service. There's an online booking service, quality assurance testing, and whilst this may sound over the top, it's actually very, very important for content providers who don't want to waste their time continually testing with video conferences with schools, or universities for that matter. In the past, many content providers would spend the whole morning testing just for a 1-hour video conference in the afternoon. And we've moved away from all of that now because all of the testing is done centrally by the Janet Video Conferencing Service. They test once, or they might test a couple of times, but once they've got it right, you know that that link is working from the content provider to the central service and also from the school to the central service. That means that so long as you go through the central service for your video conference, it should always work. All of this is centrally funded, as I said earlier, by the DFES. And I'll show you some statistics on the take-up now of video conferencing in UK schools. So you can see on the left-hand side, we started in September 2004, and it grew very, very gradually. But now we're looking at, I think, over the first 3 years, we had 10,000 video conferences. And by this October, we should have had the second 10,000 video conferences. So this is proving incredibly successful, and you can see that the usage graph is increasing quite rapidly now. The take-up is a straighter graph, but it tends to jump as people get to understand what we can offer and decide to take it up. This is just to illustrate that there is still a need for ISDN. I know we're all here to talk about IP video conferencing, IP networking, but video conferencing has to use ISDN to some extent because content providers, small museums, are still on the ISDN network, and so they still need to connect in, and we can provide a gateway service for schools on IP to connect to the content providers on ISDN. So this shows you the proportions of IP to ISDN usage. So there's still a need for a gateway to ISDN. This shows you the growth in video conferencing over the last 3 to 4 years. The red is the most recent, is the current academic year. And you can see we started from nothing and we've built up to a peak of around 1,300 video conferences in 1 month, which is quite substantial, quite a burden on the central service. This rather horrible garish graph actually shows the percentage of teaching and learning that's going on through the video conferencing. And the top of the light-coloured area in the middle there, you can see that's gradually increasing. And perhaps one of the most important things to notice is the diminishing proportion of testing and quality assurance that's going on along the top there. It's important to realise that teaching and learning is the key usage of this, not waving hands and testing connections. We're beyond all of that now. So these are a couple of pie charts, if you like, slices from that last graph. And it compares the proportion of teaching and learning across the UK on the left-hand side, which is about 87% of the total video conferencing. And in Wales, it's risen to 95%. So it shows you that the amount of testing is minimised. And schools are visiting all sorts of countries. They're going all over the world now. The benefits, of course, global video conferencing, it's all centrally managed. There's technical advice and operational support. It's of very high quality. It's all funded centrally, and it's free at the point of use, apart from the ISDN calls. And, of course, there's access to the incredible national education content. National Coal Mining Museum in England, there's also one in Wales, does a lot of video conferencing now, as does the National Space Centre. And in fact, this picture shows Commander Tim Boundy, who works with us at Janet UK and who looks after the content provider side of things. I'll come on to some statistics in a moment. National Maritime, of course, National Maritime Museum, who act as a host for a number of our events, the Churchill Museum, and, of course, the National Archives, which is one of the mainstays of the content that schools now access. HMS Belfast is an unusual one. They don't actually video conference from the ship yet, but they do plan to do that. So there are all sorts of different venues. Of course, the Natural History Museum, one of the most famous national museums in the UK, and this is Mary Anning, who discovered the first ichthyosaur in Lyme Regis in the 19th century. This is a list of almost all of the content providers that we connect to now. You can see on the left-hand side it's mostly regional museums, and on the right-hand side it's mostly the nationals. But you can see at the bottom left here there are a couple of national orchestras, or well-known orchestras anyway, and on the right-hand side are the distance learning providers. We also have some commercial distance learning providers as well as national museums and galleries. Well, one of the most interesting ones, to me at any rate, of these national museums is the National Football Museum that came on stream recently. Now, you might think, well, okay, how can you do football via video conferencing? It's sort of strange. But in fact, they don't focus on football. They focus on improving the English of boys, particularly secondary school age, who are having difficulties. And they introduced the concepts of improving English and using poetry through the medium of football. So, in fact, this isn't all about what it might seem. There's a lot of education going on here and extremely important content. And, of course, the content is delivered interactively. Most of the content is driven by the schools. It's a question and answer session. It's not a presentation like I'm delivering to you. That's the last thing they are. And very often they'll have boxes of artifacts in advance, and it's all driven by the schools. Most of the museums now have packs for teachers. They run courses for teachers before and after video conferencing, and have all sorts of support materials. So the benefits of video conferencing, as I'm sure you're well aware, it gives the schools access to content independent of location. For instance, they can visit a wide variety of museums each year instead of visiting one or two. It's easy to arrange, and of course there's fewer safety and security issues. So just a couple of statistics about video conferencing with content providers now. This is a very simple graph, but it does show you the increase in content providers that we've taken on board since Tim Boundy, who used to work for the National Space Centre, started with us in September 2006. So it does pay to have somebody working on this, full-time effectively. So he's been liaising directly with these museums and getting them on board and helping them to shape their content. About 50% of the video conferences that schools undertake are with content providers. So the rest might be with other schools or with universities or colleges. And this demonstrates quite clearly the fact that when that content providers have still got a substantial amount of ISDN connections there, as opposed to IP. And so it can be quite costly to connect to the museums. Now, earlier on I said that we were aiming to set up a service to help video conferencing users find one another. And when we were scoping this, we thought, well, really what we want is for people in education to find other people in education, and it doesn't really matter what their interests are or what technology they're using. Let's just put up a site and see what people think about it and get the feedback from that, and then go away and build a proper service. And this is what we've done. We've built a prototype called Janet Collaborate, which enables people to find other people with similar interests. It enables people to post opportunities to do anything you like. It doesn't necessarily have to be educational, but we'd prefer it if it was. And you can put up resources, associated resources like learning and teaching materials. And it's available to you now. If you want to log in, register now, you can do that. This is just an example of one of the profiles. This happens to be the National Coal Mining Museum profile. So it's open to organizations as well as individuals. This is a typical opportunity. This is from the this is from the National Maritime Museum, I think the Royal Observatory, Earth and Beyond section of the science curriculum. The Royal Observatory has an astronomer who presents astronomy right from Key Stage 1 or 2 right the way up to university level. And this is our VC Partners scheme that was recently introduced. It just lists the opportunities that are available with different levels of education. So the pilot project is available to everybody now. It's driven by a project board. We're building case studies at the moment and sending out questionnaires, and we hope to report back in July. And then we're going to develop the case for phase 2, not just the specification, but also the funding case. Now, you can see from the project board that Terina is actually on that list. And we've had a number of meetings throughout the last year or so, and we've tried to involve everybody who might be connected or have an interest in developing this product, or project, I should say. including one of the distance learning companies, because it's very important we understand their needs from the commercial sector as well as from the public sector. So members can search for and find other members with similar interests, send messages to one another, create or take part in personal groups or forums, and offer or request opportunities for collaboration. And I've also put there that they can convert those opportunities into Janet video conferencing bookings. But of course, if you wanted to, you could arrange to meet via Skype or walk down the road or telephone, whatever you like. It's just a means of bringing people together. So what are the challenges now, moving on from Janet Collaborate? We've got the connectivity of the content providers that I've also already mentioned. We've got out-of-classroom video conferencing, pupil referral units, hospital schools, these sorts of things. And, of course, reaching teachers, which is extremely difficult, where you have millions of teachers. How do you reach all of them? And how do you tell them about this new service? So we're working closely with the teacher training and development agency, the Science Learning Centres, and also the Teaching and Learning Observatory at the University of Nottingham. And that's helping us to reach many of the teachers. Now I'm getting on to the international collaboration part. We've been working very closely with a number of people across Europe and the US. And perhaps the most recent one of these that I'd like to point out is the 1,000 Schools video conferencing project that's just recently been launched in France. And we're trying to set up collaboration with them. It's actually not as easy as we would have hoped, because although the schools network in the UK comes under the NREN, Janet, the schools network in France does not come under Renater. And so we have a difficulty. Janet has to find corresponding people to communicate with in France. And this has proved to be problematic, but we are starting to overcome that. I mentioned the VC Partners service earlier on from Janet Collaborate. This is one of the ways in which we might actually be able to help this French initiative, so that if the French schools advertised on Janet Collaborate, they could just advertise opportunities looking for partners, then they could find partner schools in the UK. This map isn't really accurate. It's meant to be representative of the places that have been contacted over the last year or so. And you can see there are some big holes in this map, in particular Africa, and I think Asia is quite thin on the ground, as well as is South America. And these are the areas we'd really like to communicate with, and I'm looking forward to the BOF session this evening about communicating with Asia and Japan. We're also looking further ahead to 2012. As some of you might realize, most of you will appreciate that there's the Olympics in China this year. Well, of course, the next one's in London. And we're already working very closely with a number of organizations to make sure that the schools in the UK can communicate with athletes in various countries before, during, and after the Games. So that's a really interesting project, and it's going to go on for quite a number of years. So, there we are. Any questions? Thank you.
Olaf Schulte from ETH Zurich. I have a practical question. Are you actually addressing content providers for them to participate in your project? And are they getting money, for example, from schools when they visit them via video conferencing? Okay,
there are two questions there. We would very much like to connect up content providers onto the Janet backbone. The government department that funds them has yet to ask us to do that. I think that's the simple answer to that. With respect to content providers being paid by schools, the national museums, the official national museums, do not charge for video conferencing. but some of them, like the National Space Centre, for instance, that are not in the official group of national museums, they just call themselves a national museum, they do charge for video conferencing sessions. Others charge secondary schools, but not primary schools. But you're right in bringing the subject up, because it actually is a very costly endeavour for many museums to do this sort of thing. They really have to have somebody dedicated to it who can work throughout the day providing video conferencing sessions. And they have to be very, very flexible. They have to really provide what the schools want in terms of the national curriculum.
Any other question? If not, then I have one. And it's concerning video conferencing. The number of NRENs are active in the area of video conferencing for a very long time now. And even though you predict numbers that seem to rise, it doesn't really take off for reasons we know. You as a specialist, predicting the future, looking 3, 4, 5 years ahead, do you see from the point we are now some disruptive technology, some certain trends coming up on the horizon that might be exchanging the art of video conferencing or video conferencing as a whole as we know it today?
Well, the key thing about video conferencing is the use of standards and interoperability. If you don't all use the same standards, you cannot video conference with one another. Now, if that standard becomes Flash, well, then that's fine. Everybody will use Flash. I'm not suggesting that for one moment, but it's, Flash is a very popular video medium, and it could well be that replaces H.323. H.323 is very costly to set up initially, but of course the network is there, it's available, and it does provide you with high quality. But in fact, what we're finding is that schools are moving towards high definition now. They're not dropping H.323 video conferencing and moving to Flash. They're actually looking at high definition stuff instead. So they're actually reinforcing their choice, their first choice, rather than abandoning it.
Is there another question? Okay, if not, then let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Well, it doesn't look like that we have any connection to the US, right? So we don't. That means, before I leave you off for an early coffee break, I would like to mention that please attend the buffs if you're really interested in. There's 2 buffs concerning this subject right here tonight. One is about the one that Robert just mentioned, is the Euro-Asian collaboration buff, certain opportunities, which will take place in this room right here. And the other one is a buff about streaming services of NRENs and universities with the name Do YouTube U2 in the room Mozart, and both of them start at 6 o'clock. Thanks for attending this session, and I wish you a pleasant afternoon.